2007 through 2012 Ford Escape with the 3.0 liter V6 engine valve cover replacement. I'm Brian Essick from How To Automotive. I'm going to walk you through the steps to replacing that. So to do the valve covers, we need to take the upper plenum off to get to the back valve cover. So I'm going to get started by removing this first cover right here. So I'm going to remove the bolt here and lift the cover off. After getting the cover off, the next step is to get the vent line off. So it's got this little green tab right here that you're going to hook with your thumb and kind of pry it backwards, and then you'll pull it off at the same time. So you'll pry back like this and pry it down and then pry off. So now you're just going to rotate the tube out of your way like this. And then the next step is to remove the hose clamp here and here, loosen those up, and then you'll pull the air boot off. Next, we need to disconnect the throttle cable and cruise control cable. So you're going to rotate the throttle backwards, and then on the cruise control here, you'll just pull it towards the front, and that'll pop it off the little perch that it mounts onto. It's just clipped on. So once you get that off, then you'll pull the throttle back and then pull the cable over and pull it out of its little groove on the bottom there. The next step is to remove the throttle body. So you'll remove the 4 bolts that hold it on, and then you'll pull the throttle body off, leaving everything connected, hoses, electrical connectors, and everything. Don't disconnect anything. On jobs like this, I like to use my favorite tool here. It's a M12 3/8 drive cordless ratchet made by Milwaukee. This thing is amazing. If you guys haven't seen this, I recommend you check it out. I'll leave a link in the description of the video. That way you can check it out. This thing makes the job so fast. So go ahead and remove the 4 bolts holding the throttle body. On the bottom bolt of the throttle body here, there's a wire loom that's mounted onto the stud. So you're going to pry that off. What I did was use a little flat blade screwdriver like this, pry the wire loom off, and then you can finish removing the bolt. Now that the throttle body is unbolted, you're just going to tuck it out of your way just like this and just leave it there. Next thing we're going to do is unbolt the EGR valve. So there's 2 bolts, one here and one on the back side right here. You'll remove those, and you'll just slightly push the EGR valve back. Next, you'll unplug the idle air control motor like this, and then the vacuum switch right here, you'll just squeeze the tab and pull the electrical connector off. Now that you got the EGR unbolted and slightly pushed back, the gasket may or may not fall out. And if it doesn't fall out and stays on the EGR valve, it's fine. You can reuse the gasket and just leave it stuck onto the EGR valve. And then once you get that off, the next step is we're going to remove the bracket right here for the vacuum switch. So there's going to be a bolt here and here that you're going to remove. So once you got the vacuum switch unbolted like this, it turns out you can actually just leave the electrical connector plugged in. So I'm going to plug it back in here. And now you can just flip the vacuum switch back like this and just push it out of your way. Now we need to remove the vent line here, and it has the same style as the vent line in the front here. So we're just going to push this little green tab out of our way, push it back, and then push the vent line off of the port right here. Now that the vent line is off, there's a vacuum line here and the vacuum line here that you'll remove. To aid in getting these hoses off, I'm going to use this little hose popping tool. You kind of just stick it in between, squeeze, and it spreads and it pops the vacuum hoses off. It's a pretty cool little tool. I'll also link this up in the description, that way if you need to pick it up. And now we're going to remove the electrical connector. Use a flat blade screwdriver, put it in between, and pry it out like this. And there's going to be one below it that you'll pry out of its little perch too, and just push them back out of your way. Now we're going to unbolt the bracket that holds the cables down. So you'll take the bolt out, and then we'll remove the 3 bolts here. So one here behind the cover, and then the 2 in the front here. And once you get that unbolted, then you just flip it up and out of your way like this. Now we're ready to start removing the bolts on the intake. So we'll remove the bolt here, 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 here. And once you get those out, then you'll go to the front and remove the 4 in the front right here. So once you get the bolts loose, they're designed to stay in the intake, so you'll just leave them in there. So now you can grab the intake and lift it up. There's a vacuum line that's still going to be mounted onto the bottom side of the intake here. I'm just going to actually leave it hooked up, and I'm just going to take the intake and flip it up and out of our way. It's just one less thing that you need to remove. Now, as a precaution, I like to take rags and stuff them down the intake ports. That way no debris or anything falls in while we're working. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the coils by unplugging the connectors. We'll unplug all three of them, remove all three of the bolts, and pull the coils out. And I like to set all three of the coils out on my bench in the order that I took them out. Now with a flat blade screwdriver, you can go ahead and pop the wiring harness off the studs here. And go ahead and flip the coil wiring harness out of your way. And then back here on the back, we can finish taking off the vent little tube here by squeezing the tab and pulling off and setting this aside. And then over here on the front, we're going to unplug the black and gray harness connector here. We're also going to unplug the vacuum fitting right here. And then work our way around the valve cover, making sure that nothing is attached. If it is, we're going to pop that off of a flat blade screwdriver like these two wires here. And then we're going to start removing the bolts, and we'll start removing them all the way around the valve cover, and then we'll come down the center of the valve cover, removing all the bolts. So before I start taking the bolts out of the valve cover though, I'm going to spend a little time making sure the wiring harness is just pushed back as far as I can, clearing and making as much room as I can. And then after I get everything unplugged and disconnected, I'll start removing the bolts. But on the back of the valve cover here, the main wiring harness is bolted to the valve cover right here. So there's going to be a bolt here in the corner, right here, and then over here. So this right here in the corner, and then over here in the middle, there is a bolt that will remove a nut basically, and then we'll lift the wiring harness up and push it back towards the firewall. So as we start to pull the bolts out, some of the bolts have studs on them like this, and we want to keep track of where these bolts go because the wire looms mount onto these little studs. So I recommend you take them off and lay them on your bench, or make a diagram or take a photograph of the ones with the studs so you know exactly how to put them back on. So after removing all the bolts, we need to take a little pry bar like this, and we're going to pry the valve cover up. Here's a good spot back here in the back, so you'll put it in between the two little lips and give it a little pry, and that'll break the seal, and you can pull the valve cover up. And then on the front, you may have to pry a little bit too, so you'll find a good spot to pry. And then you pry it up like this. And then once you get it broken free on both sides, you can just pretty much grab the valve cover here and just lift straight up and out. Also, if you had a helper to help hold the wiring harness back, that would make life a lot easier. And also, you're gonna have to work around the hose here and just push everything back, and then just keep working the valve cover, you know, off the cylinder head here, and it'll come free eventually. Okay, now that we got the valve cover off, the next step would clean the mating surface on the cylinder head. And you want to make sure when you clean it, you don't knock the dirt into the cylinder head. So you want to wipe away from the cylinder head, you know, all the way around. Also, there's going to be a couple spots where there was silicone, and we need to use a razor blade or a scraper and scrape all that silicone off. Make sure the surface is nice and clean. So if your car hasn't had a tune-up done in a while, you might want to change the spark plugs out while you have all this access. Now I'm going to start removing the front valve cover. So I'm going to start by unplugging all three of the coils, removing the bolts, pulling the coils out, and setting aside. Then I'll start popping the wire harness loom off the little studs here and working my way around the valve cover, removing all the wires. And then once I get the wires I'll just unplugged, I'll just flip them out of my way like this. Now I'm going to start removing the bolts down the middle here, and then I'll work my way around the valve cover, kind of counterclockwise. And also keep track of some of the bolts that have the studs that hold the wire loom, so you want to keep track of where they go. Now the radiator hose is supposed to have these little clamps that hold the radiator hose on, but on this vehicle they're broken. On yours you may have, and you just pop them off of a flat blade screwdriver. Once you get those popped off, then you can actually take the radiator hose here and you can just flex it out of your way. There's a lot of play there, and then you can get to the bolts on the lower side. And also, if you look through the radiator core support here, you can actually see the bolts, and if with a long extension, you could actually get to the bolts. So I'm going to use a 1/4 inch drive extension and a socket here to get to the bolts, and I got about a 2 foot long extension here, and you may use a little bit of a wobble to get to some of them, but the hardest bolt to get to is the one bolt right behind the bracket here, but you can just reach around the back and flex the radiator hose out, and then with a short extension you can get to the bolt. It's not that difficult. Now that you got all the bolts out, you're going to use a little screwdriver and pry and pop the valve cover up. Now that the valve cover is free, it won't come all the way out because there's a little bracket right here is making contact with it. So what we need to do is we need to loosen the bolt up on this bracket and kind of just push the bracket off to the side, let it rock out of our way. We don't need to take it all the way off, but we do need to go from underneath and loosen that bolt up. So I'm going to lift my vehicle up. You guys can do this floor jacks and jack stand, just you'll have to jack the car up and get some clearance. So what we're going to do is look up, straight above. Right here is the cat, and I'm going to use my screwdriver to guide, so point out where the bolt is. So you follow the cat up, and just above the cat to the right above the motor mount is the bolt for that bracket. So we're just going to loosen that bolt. A couple threads is all we need to do. Now we can lower the vehicle back down. And now, as you can see, we will flex the hose out of the way, and we'll take the bracket and just tilt it out of our way. That's plenty of clearance. Now we can take the valve cover here and just pull it off and pull it out of the car. Another tip is to remove the dipstick. It's made out of plastic, so you don't want to hit it or make contact with it and break it off. So go ahead and just remove the dipstick and then fully remove the valve cover out of the car. So now that we got the cover off, we're going to clean the mating surfaces just like we clean the mating surfaces on the back cylinder head, scraping off the silicone on the corners here. And on this front valve cover, there are cam lobes that we need to clean the silicone off on the front too. Now we're ready to clean the valve covers itself. So you can go ahead and take them in your, put them in your parts washer or power wash them, however you want to clean them, but get them nice and clean. And also we want to pick out all the rest of the tube seals and just use a flat blade screwdriver and pick those out, and prep the valve cover for reinstallation. So we can also change out the seals in the intake here and the throttle body gasket. I'll link all of these parts up in the description: valve covers, intake gaskets, throttle body, and also the tools that I use. That way, if you guys need to pick any of this up, it's available. For the valve covers, I'm going to use this Velcro gasket kit, and I'll also link this up in the description. It comes with the tube seals and everything. So I'm going to go ahead and pick out the old O-rings for the intake manifold here and swap those out. On the valve covers, you can go ahead and install your tube seals and press in your new gasket into the grooves of it, and make sure it's fully seated. There is a left and right valve covers. So the bolts have rubber bushings that are come with the kit, and we need to change those out. So we'll take all the bolts, put them in a vise like this, use a flat blade screwdriver, and just pry the bushings off and install the new ones. So these rubber bushings are very soft, and they just push on with your fingers. It's very easy. So now that we got that done, next we need to do is take a little bit of Right Stuff silicone. It's a brand that we use here at How To Automotive, and you're going to put a little dab of that silicone in the corners. Or on the valve cover here, you can put the silicone here and here. And I'll link up the silicone in the description of the video also if you need to pick this up. So just put a little dab here and here. And we're working on the back valve cover first, and we're going to go ahead and make sure that the wire harness is out of our way. And then we'll go ahead and reinstall the valve cover onto the rear cylinder head, and remount the bolts, and make sure you keep track of where they went. And then once you get all the bolts started, before you tighten any of them down, I recommend that you take a dental mirror like this, And what you're going to do is you're going to look around the valve cover all the way around and make sure that the valve cover gasket didn't fall off, or is not, no wires or anything are pinched in between the cover and the cylinder head. So, and after you check all that out, then we'll torque the valve cover down, and we're going to do this in a certain pattern. I printed this little diagram out. So we're going to be torquing them down to 89 inch-pounds, or about 7.5 foot-pounds is the conversion. So we're going to follow the certain patterns. So we're going to so starting in the middle, be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And we're just going to do this in this pattern. Now that the rear valve cover is secure, we're going to reinstall the gasket on the front valve cover, tube seals, and then we're going to put the silicone on the corners, 4 corners on this valve cover. So I've been using this Right Stuff for about 10 years now. So we're just going to take a little bit of it and just put it right here on the valve cover. Okay, now that the valve cover has been repositioned back onto the cylinder head, you can go ahead and start all the bolts, and then make sure you keep track of which ones had the studs on it. And then you're going to use the dental mirror just like you did on the back one. Make sure that there's nothing pinched in between and the gasket didn't fall off in any way, shape, or form. And then once you're satisfied with that, then we can go ahead and torque it down. And this pattern's a little bit different, but we're going to start in the middle again and just follow this pattern. It's a crisscross pattern. And this will be torqued down to 89 inch-pounds or 7.5 foot-pounds, the same as the rear valve cover was. The diagrams are courtesy of AllData. It's a subscription-based service that we use that supplies information for torque specs and stuff. Both of the valve covers are torqued down. We can go ahead and start in the back here and put the wire loom back over the studs here and put the 2 little bolts that held them down, and go ahead and tighten those up. And then we're just going to work our way around, plugging everything back in. We can plug the coils back in, bolt those back up. So once you got the coils back in and the wiring harness plugged back into them, now we're going to reinstall this little vent valve. You just put it back onto the port, push on till you hear a little audible click. Now you can start working your way around the valve cover, making sure everything's plugged in, like these black and gray connectors here. Go ahead and plug those back in, but you want to push them aside so we can put the intake back on. Now we're going to do the same thing on the front valve cover here. We're going to re-secure the wiring harness, and then we're going to reinstall our coils and bolt those back up, plug the harness back in, and work our way around, reconnecting all the lines and the vacuum fitting right here. Make sure that's all plugged in. Now we can go ahead and remove all the rags. Make sure the mating surface is clean here. And then after that, we can take the intake manifold here and flip it down back into position. Okay, now that you got the intake repositioned, go ahead and start the bolts. And you're going to torque it down to 89 inch-pounds or 7.5 foot-pounds. And you're going to use this pattern here. And this diagram is courtesy of AllData. Now that the manifold is torqued down, you can take the vent line here, go ahead and position that back over the port, and pull it and push it on until you hear a click. Now we're going to take the 2 vacuum lines here, and we're going to reinstall those. And make sure you, after you install the brake booster hose, you want to make sure the clamp is on. And then we're going to re-secure the electrical connectors so they just press into the little fittings here on the intake. Then you just keep following around, making sure everything is plugged in. Now we're going to remount the vacuum switch here. Once you get that bolted up there, you're going to put the wire loom back over the stud. Then you're going to make sure your gasket is in the E-jar valve, and then start the 2 bolts and tighten that down. Now we can change out the throttle body O-ring here, pick it out and install the new one. Then we can go ahead and plug in the idle air control motor here on the top. So after we change out the O-ring on the throttle body here, we can go ahead and remount the throttle body itself and bolt it up. The bolt with the stud goes on the bottom right hand corner of the throttle body here, and the wire loom will plug back into it. After you get that resecured, now you can flip the throttle cables back into position, And then we're going to hook up the throttle cables by rotating the throttle body open and then reinstalling the cable. And now we're going to reinstall the cruise control, and it just hooks over the edge here, and you push it on till you hear a little click, and that's it. Now we're going to go ahead and install the 3 bolts on the bracket here and the 1 bolt on the bracket back there. Next, we can go ahead and install the air snorkel here. And once you got the air snorkel on, we can go ahead and put the vent line back on and re-secure that. Now we can put the top cover that went over the throttle cables here and put the 2 bolts in and tighten those up. And that'll complete the job of replacing the valve cover gaskets on a 2007 through 2012 Ford Escape with the 3.0 liter V6 engine. I'm Brian Essick from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching my videos, encourage you to subscribe, invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this, and also to remind you that I will link up all the parts and tools in the description of the video.